Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Hamas respond to the 60-day ceasefire deal but push for a complete end to the war. President Trump lifts sanctions on Syria to support the country's path to stability and peace. And Diddy is found not guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking, but guilty of transportation in prostitution. Hamas says it is ready for a ceasefire with Israel, but the war in Gaza must end. Earlier today, President Donald Trump said Israel had agreed to a 60-day pause and urged Hamas to accept the deal. Taking to Truth Social, Trump said Israel has agreed to the necessary conditions to finalize the 60-day ceasefire, during which time we'll work with all parties to end the war. The Qataris and Egyptians, who have worked very hard to help bring peace, will deliver this final proposal. I hope for the good of the Middle East that Hamas takes this deal, because it will not get better. It will only get worse. It comes days before the US president is due to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Speaking earlier, the Israeli Prime Minister vowed to see the end of Hamas in Gaza. Take a listen.
I'm telling you, there will be no Hamas. There will be no Hamas done. We're not going back to that. It's over. We'll release all our hostages and we will defeat Hamas.
I'm now joined by retired US Ambassador to Istanbul, Matthew Bryza. Matthew, a pleasure to have you on the show. First of all, why does Israel just want a 60-day ceasefire and not a permanent one?
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Great to be with you. It's analogous to Russia wanting to keep on fighting in Ukraine. Netanyahu thinks that Israel is winning, meaning destroying Hamas step by step. And he has, these extreme rightists in his coalition, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and they are insisting on fighting and I think ethnically cleansing both Gaza and the West Bank. So, to hold his political coalition together, he feels he has to keep on fighting.
With Iran's ability to help Hamas now degraded after the US-Israeli strikes, will this force the militant group to accept the ceasefire deal on the table?
I think that's a great point. I mean, on the one hand, Hamas's support from Iran is no longer existent, but Hamas itself is devastated. And so I think Hamas is, by saying that we demand a full end of the war, they're in sort of desperate straits. I mean, they want to survive physically, and I think they're looking for a political way to be able to maintain some authority. I don't know at the end of the day how much longer, who knows how much longer they can fight. And eventually every war ends with a political settlement of some sort. It's just unclear if now is that moment and how much fight is left in Hamas.
Will Trump achieve a Gaza ceasefire? The president has said he'll be very firm with Netanyahu at the White House. What do we expect?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I mean, we're guessing here, but my guess is yes. My guess is Trump has been telling Netanyahu already, look, we did what you asked for years. Not only did we acquiesce to you attacking Iran directly, but we, from Trump's perspective, destroyed Iran's nuclear weapons capability. Now it's your turn to pay. And by payment, you have to do the ceasefire. And the ceasefire needs to lead to an end of the war. But the terms thereof are what's under negotiation with the mediation, as you noted, of Egypt and Qatar.
The extreme right-wingers in Netanyahu's coalition, as you mentioned, have been clear about their desire for the war to continue. So how much support does this latest ceasefire agreement have within the Israeli government, the coalition, fragile as it is, and also within society in Israel?
Well, yeah, I think within the coalition, as we're both saying, I mean, Ben Gvir and Minister Smotrich, they want to keep on fighting forever. But they're too small. They represent two small parties in the coalition, and it may be that the coalition has to collapse, and then there would need to be a realignment, maybe new elections in Israel, and then we would see how the Israeli people vote. But my guess is, I mean, it seems clear from opinion polls, the Israeli people want the war to end. They want the hostages freed more than anything. I think the majority of Israelis are critical of Netanyahu precisely for continuing the war rather than focusing entirely on freeing the hostages. Now, Netanyahu has argued, well, it is through military pressure that we've been able to get any of the hostages released. But I think that excuse is starting to wear thin on the Israeli population. And you know, were there to be new elections, it seems very unlikely that he would win. Though the idea of destroying Hamas has been popular across the political spectrum in Israel. It's just that even more Israelis want to see the hostages released.
Israel's military says that it has expanded its operations in Gaza ahead of the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu. Now, really, Matthew, this comes despite over 56,000 Palestinians dead and absolutely huge hundreds of thousands of people now starving. It appears Israel's aggression just continues at the moment.
Leigh-Ann, it's so hard to watch the devastation, the brutality of the Israeli Defense Forces against the Palestinian civilians, but we have to watch it. I feel have a duty to the dignity of those poor victims. Stepping up a military offensive, however, on the eve of negotiations is a classic tactic of warfare. It is usually the case. I would be surprised if Israel didn't step up its offensive just before the negotiations. But yeah, I think that, you know, this footage, like you're showing now, like all the international news services show every day, of the devastation, the bombing of tents and hospitals and the starvation, is not being shown on Israeli TV. So I think the Israeli people don't share this full vision of what's actually happening that you and I and everybody watching Arabiya or any other international network are able to watch.
And Matthew, as a former US ambassador, where do we go from here? Because, you know, we've got the 60-day proposal that Donald Trump has put on the table. It doesn't actually appear to be much different to what we've seen before. A few tweaks here and there. We know that Hamas wants something completely different. Are we at a deadlock? Where's the answer here?
Yeah, well, we don't know yet, right? So in a classic diplomatic approach, you bite off whatever pieces you can to get to cessation of hostilities, and then take the negotiations from there. It's impossible to predict how those negotiations will go. But as we've already said, you know, Hamas seems desperate for the fighting to stop. Israel has a strong political incentive inside the coalition to keep fighting, but the Israeli people don't want to see the fighting continue. So how those three pieces play out, plus Donald Trump, who considers himself the world's greatest deal maker, very much wanting a deal. And of course, you know, he wants to announce it on Monday when Netanyahu is in the Oval Office, but Trump really, really wants the war to end. So these are four different bits of political power that are going to be knocking their heads together, with hopefully Egypt and Qatar being able to broker some sort of an outcome.
Matthew Bryza, former US ambassador, thank you so much for joining me. Such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Pleasure for me.
Staying with the US and also the Middle East now, as President Trump has signed an executive order to end American sanctions against Syria. The White House says this will support Syria's path to stability and peace. The US had imposed the sanctions during the Assad government's rule, which was overthrown in December. Trump promised to lift the sanctions back in May when he met with the country's new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, in Riyadh. I'm now joined by Qutaiba Idlbi, Director for the America's Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Qutaiba, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, President Trump has revoked US sanctions on Syria after a devastating civil war. Will this help support the country towards stability and peace, like the US administration has said?
Certainly. U.S. sanctions have been in place for a while now on Syria, on the Assad regime, because of the Assad regime's foreign policy, whether in the region or abroad, because of its support for terrorism and because of its efforts to destabilize the region. And because of that, we have seen over and over how the Syrian people were the first one to actually suffer as a result because of those policies of the Assad regime, especially in the last 14 years. The historic step by President Trump 2 days ago really signifies the future that is coming for the Syrian people. For the first time, Syria could actually be free of sanctions. As President Trump outlined in his decision, this is not only about removing executive orders that impose sanction regimes on Syria, but the U.S. administration will also be looking at designations of Syria, of certain Syrian officials to be removed down the line. So this will definitely draw a lot of investment from Syrians in the diaspora, from American companies, from American tech who are actually looking forward to engage in the Syrian markets after devastating 14 years of war and over 50 years of dictatorship.
So possibly could put Syria back on the global stage, but the wide-ranging executive order signed by Donald Trump has also asked the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to review HTS's designation as a terrorist organization. Do you think this is a risky move to do this?
I think it's a necessary step to really respond to the positive developments that the Syrian government has been leading for the last 6 months. Not only the Syrian government has provided a new face for Syria that is based on cooperation, that is based on connecting with the region and with countries abroad, that is based on ensuring that Syria does not constitute a threat or that there are no threats emerging from Syria against anyone in the region. But also the Syrian government has been now the main partner to counter ISIS and to continue to push Iran out of Syria for the last 6 months. So this delisting, if and when it happens, it will be a reflection of this increasing partnership between the United States and the new Syrian government, and is certainly required because without the delisting, it would be really hard for American government, but also American businesses to engage meaningfully and fully with different branches of the Syrian government. So I think there is an understanding in Washington by the Trump administration of the need to really support this government, of the need to ensure stability for the time to come, and to really work hand in hand with the new Syrian government on all issues on the table.
President Trump is due to meet his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu next week. The US clearly, as you've just been explaining to me, wants stronger ties with Syria. Is normalization possible between Israel and Syria at the stage where we are?
I think the most important part here is to really ensure a positive environment that allows the reduction of hostilities, that allows the reduction of threats to both countries and to every country in the region. The foreign minister has outlined very clearly that Syria wants to make sure that it doesn't constitute to anyone a threat to anyone in the region, including Israel. I think to start this positive environment, there is a need to return back to the 1974 lines of deconfliction, where Syria can ensure the safety of the borders on its side, and where Israel can really withdraw back to the 1974 lines and really stop violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. And I think this is where the conversations so far have been focused on. We've seen some positive developments on the ground as a result of those discussions, and the hope that those discussions would really lead to a comprehensive agreement around those lines.
The Israeli military says it has captured a terrorist cell operated by Iran in southern Syria, and this is news that we got today. Is this a common occurrence for terrorists to hide inside and operate from inside Syria?
We haven't seen concrete intelligence around such actions. At the end of the day now, there is a new government in place that has been the #1 enemy of Iran, of Hezbollah for a long time. So it's very important down the line to really work with and through the Syrian government to ensure that such threats are assessed and dealt with in the best way possible by the Syrian government. I think the main issue here is that if those acts of, violating Syria's sovereignty continue, it just attracts other violations, specifically by Iran and by other malign actors in the region. So it wouldn't be in the interest of anyone down the line to really continue on that path. I think there is an alignment of interest across everyone in the region to ensure that the win we had on December 8th by pushing Iran and Hezbollah out of the region and the Levant continues to be the case.
And just before I let you go, I just want to talk to you quickly about the rebuilding of Syria, because you did mention the future of Syria free from sanctions, US investment as possible from American companies. But realistically, how long is this going to take? How difficult will it be to rebuild Syria?
Look, this is not going to be an easy task at all. What the Assad regime has really destroyed, not only in the last 14 years of war, but in the last 6 decades of its ruling of Syria, is not going to be fixed overnight. I think the main issue here is really to start on the right track and to really continue to give the hope to the Syrian people that the world will continue to engage with them now that Assad is gone. What the Syrian government is trying to do is just lay the path right now for a positive engagement that is beneficial for the region, that is beneficial for the international community, but most importantly, beneficial for the Syrian people. That would create jobs, that would improve infrastructure, that would attract investment from the region and from abroad, where Syrians can benefit, but also where the international community can see a positive space where they can engage not only on economy and investment, but also on security, military, and political issues. So we're quite hopeful about those engagements. We're quite hopeful that the results are going to come down the line in the very near future, and they will be reflected in the services and the improvement of the daily life of the Syrian people for sure.
Qutaiba Idlbi, Director for the America's Syrian Ministry for Foreign Affairs. It was really great to have your insights. I appreciate you joining the show. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The US has paused weapon shipments to Kyiv. That's despite President Trump discussing air defenses with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit last week. The White House said the decision was made to put America's interests first following a review of US military support and assistance to other countries. One Ukrainian MP has called the move painful and very unpleasant. Now, Japan has been rocked by an earthquake off the coast of Kagoshima. It measured 5.5, as reported by the Japanese Broadcasting Corporation, NHK. No tsunami warning has been issued. Qantas customers may have been affected by a cyber attack which targeted the airline's third-party consumer service platform. Earlier this week, the company picked up unusual activity used by the contact center, which stores the data of 6 million people. Qantas say they took immediate steps and contained the system and is investigating the full extent of the attack. Oh, and fancy this, a stowaway snake managed to delay a flight in Melbourne, Australia after being found in the plane's cargo hold. Passengers were held for 2 hours after the reptile was discovered during boarding. Originally thought to be venomous, it turned out to be a less dangerous green tree snake. The animal is now in the care of a local vet and is looking for a new home with a licensed snake owner. If you want a snake, it's there. Now, music mogul Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering, but guilty on a lesser charge of transportation to engage in prostitution. 12 jurors, 8 men and 4 women, deliberated for over 12 and a half hours. A judge has allowed the rapper to be released and allowed to return home. Let's get the latest with trial attorney Richard Roth. Richard, a pleasure to have you on today. Chaos outside of the court today as Diddy was found guilty of 2 out of the 5 charges. Were you surprised by the verdict that came through?
So thank you for having me. I was a bit surprised. The federal prosecutors, particularly the Southern District of New York, generally don't take a case or try a case unless they believe they're going to win it. And to them, it really wasn't a win. The major charges, which would have caused Diddy tremendous jail time, he was acquitted on. So it is a bit of a surprise that, again, we're not in the courtroom, but it is a bit of a surprise that he was not convicted of the more serious offenses.
So you were surprised that he wasn't convicted on those, because when we have a look at it, it was racketeering, conspiracy, not guilty, and also sex trafficking of women known as Jane, not guilty. And I was just wondering right now, if we have a look at the jury selection, it was 8 men and 4 women. Do you think that gender plays a role in the verdict?
I don't think gender played a role that much. I think the mistake that was made was that a lot of the crimes he committed, and we know he committed crimes, we've seen the videos, are really state crimes. And the federal, because the statute of limitation has run on those, the federal government essentially tried to take those facts and contort them into federal crimes. So, yeah, it is. I don't necessarily think that it's a male-woman issue with the jury. I think that it was a very hard case for the federal government to put on. And the result is somewhat shocking because they generally don't lose, but the jury just didn't buy the majority of the serious indictment.
We heard from 34 witnesses during the 2-week trial, including Cassie Ventura, a former girlfriend, and we also saw that absolutely horrific video of her being attacked. Would the jury have taken this video into consideration or ignored it because it wasn't related to the charges against him?
Well, that's right. I think you hit the nail on the head. They took it into effect when it came time to the minor crimes. But when it comes to RICO's a very complicated federal statute, fraud-based, which essentially says that a group of individuals, an enterprise, conspired to do things. And as horrific as that video was, and as strong as the testimony was, it didn't really fit in the RICO conspiracy box because it was just him acting. So I think that it was very compelling, and it is horrific what he did. But it just did not amount to some of the crimes he was charged with, and he's a very fortunate man.
Indeed. Diddy has been acquitted, as we said, on 2 of the most serious charges. But he could still, Richard, face up to 10 years in prison. Do you think that he could be a free man today? And also, how does this affect his reputation, his career? You know, there's still the court of public opinion out there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. He will not be a free man today. There will be sentencing. He may be a free man at sentencing because he's been in jail for several months, and that may be part of the essentially what he's sentenced with. He may be out in a year or 2. But the unusual fact is that as a convicted felon, it may actually garnish more attention. He's a bad boy and bad boy records. So it may have the reverse effect of what a lot of the public would think. I would think, quite frankly, he's a convicted felon. The way he treated Ms. Ventura and the way he treated other people is horrific. But he may very well be coming out with an album in a few years. So let's see where it goes. But as we said, he's a very fortunate man today because he won't be spending the rest of his life in jail.
That's an interesting point that you just said there. You know, it could actually boost his fame. But this isn't the end of Diddy's legal journey, really, is it? He still has some civil cases to face. So what happens now with Diddy?
So, yes, you're right. The civil cases he has to face are very different because, number one, the standard is lower for a civil case than it is for the criminal. But more importantly, those can be resolved with money. It's not about his liberty. It's not about him doing jail time. It's about paying money to people who are suing him. So it's nowhere near as serious as what we have now. And what Diddy could very well be doing is he could very well be figuring out what his next move is, what he does on the PR front, what he does in the entertainment front, resolve the litigations as best you can. He certainly has a lot of money, so he hopefully will be able to resolve those. And he may very well turn the corner and continue his entertainment mogul status that he had before this indictment. So we don't know yet, but it could he like we said, he could turn the corner, and it could be he's very lucky and very fortunate that they went after him for charges that they couldn't nail him with.
Just one quick question before I do let you go, Richard. Large crowds continue to grow outside of court. I must admit, I've watched a lot of trials of celebrities over the years, and nothing seems to have attracted a crowd like this. Why do you think this is the case with the Diddy trial?
So it's very interesting you said. I happen to have been walking by. I was outside the courthouse yesterday where they were waiting for a jury. I happen to have been in the same courthouse, but for a different matter. And Diddy is, listen, number one is he's a spectacle. He's an entertainer. He's a celebrity. Number two, he's very controversial. There are people that love him and love his music and love how he advanced the black cause, the entertainment cause. But then there's a lot of people, especially after that video came out, that just don't want to have anything to do with him. So I literally saw people arguing over Diddy when I was there yesterday, and it's attracting a big crowd because it's very controversial. I think, quite frankly, that someone who did something like that certainly deserves a lot of jail time, and there are a lot of people in my corner, but a lot of other people think the opposite. They think that what he did was inappropriate, but that he still is famous and he should be let go for his, if you will, sins.
So, Richard, yesterday, what was the atmosphere like outside the court? You said you were there and people were arguing. Has it just become a really big, heated debate over in the States?
It is. People who are big fans of his sort of try to excuse his behavior, which I don't understand. But then there's a lot of people there that are saying, we don't care what he goes to jail for. The man should be in jail. You don't treat a woman the way you treated Ms. Ventura or the other women. I mean, there's a lot of things. He put a car on fire. He really did he engaged in a lot of criminal behavior. The problem is that because the statute's gone on the state law, the federal government tried to nail him on that, and that it just didn't stick. It didn't stick as much as they wanted it to.
Richard Roth, thank you so much for joining us. A fascinating window there into the P. Diddy story that I'm sure will continue. Trial attorney Richard Roth, once again, your thoughts have been much appreciated on the show. Police in Singapore have been given the power to seize control of people's bank accounts there if they suspect they're being scammed. The authority comes under a new law aiming to address an issue police persistently face, namely when victims refuse to believe they are being tricked despite warnings. Patrick Falk has more details.
Now, the new legislation, which is called the Protection from Scams Act, was passed in January, but has only come into effect in July, and it comes as the problem of scamming is growing in Singapore. In 2024, victims lost a total of $860 million, a record for a single year. And the number of cases reported also rose to 50,000 last year, up from just 15,000 in 2020. But the most intriguing thing, perhaps, about all of this is that in more than 3 out of 4 cases, victims voluntarily gave over their money without scammers even having access to their bank account. So they were willingly giving their money away to them. And police say that they are frequently encountering cases where people simply refuse to believe that they have been scammed, even when there is evidence to prove it. And that's also despite the fact that people are much more aware about the prevalence of scamming these days.
I mean, these things happen. They're definitely not nice. I don't know how to crack down upon them, but they're rampant these days, honestly. Like, the amount of phone calls from scammers I receive on like a weekly basis, I receive them almost every week.
Under the law, police can order a bank to block a potential victim's transactions if they think the person is being scammed. They can also block their ATM and credit card services as well. They can still access their funds for legitimate purposes, things like paying for their bills or their daily expenses, but that is at the discretion of the police. Authorities say that police can control a person's account, a potential victim's account, for up to 30 days, and that can be extended as many as 5 times if they feel it's necessary. As you can imagine, this has also brought about concerns over accountability as well as potential abuse.
Their intention is good. I think maybe some people might find it intrusive because after all it's very confidential. But personally myself, I think it's a good thing. So after all, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Well, as you heard, those for these sorts of controls say it's necessary because of the massive amounts of money that victims are losing, and also to protect them. Authorities say, though, that this sort of measure should only really be used as a last resort when nothing more can be done to convince a person that they're being scammed, if that is what's happening. Now, the most common types of scam here in Singapore include e-commerce fraud, as well as job and investment scams. Love scams, where tricksters spend months building relationships with people before duping them into sending their money over, are also on the rise. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya, Singapore.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. President Trump has threatened Japan with tariffs of up to 35% if no trade deal is reached before the July the 9th deadline. Current tariffs on Japanese goods stand at 10%, but could soar, especially on vehicles and metals. Japan remains firm, refusing concessions on agriculture. Trump has criticized Japan's rice imports and expressed doubt about reaching an agreement. Now, the Bank of England is launching its first major banknote redesign in over 50 years, inviting public input on new themes such as nature, innovation, and key events in history. While historic figures may remain, the redesign could feature British birds, landmarks, or cultural icons. The public can submit suggestions until the end of July, with final decisions made by the bank's governor. Let's get all the sport now, and after a strong start, British tennis hopes dimmed as only 3 of 9 home players advanced on day 2 of Wimbledon. However, day 3 sees renewed British involvement in singles and doubles. Novak Djokovic overcame illness to progress, while Jannik Sinner also cruised through. Top seed Aryna Sabalenka, Carlos Alcaraz and Emma Raducanu headline centre court today as cooler weather does arrive. And Borussia Dortmund has defeated Monterrey 2-1 in the Club World Cup last 16. However, midfielder Joab Bellingham will miss the quarter-final against Real Madrid due to suspension from accumulated yellow cards. As a result, he will not face his brother, Jude Bellingham, who plays for Real, but who also beat Juventus in the last 8. There's 1 week to go until the US trade deal deadline. A trade framework has been agreed between the United States and China, but the 90-day pause ends on the 12th of August. With the advancement of President Trump's big, beautiful bill, some motor industry experts believe cuts in EV technology could put US car makers behind China, who already have a significant lead in the batteries and minerals needed to produce those cars. Let's get the thoughts of Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna, board member and strategic advisor at Bryza Investments and former advisor at the World Bank. He joins me right now. An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Can we start with the US and China? They've reached an agreement again to de-escalate trade tensions. What did the two sides agree on?
Well, basically, when the tariffs start escalating with the US and Trump putting up to 145%, China retaliated as well with the 125%. Now the effective tariff went down back after the negotiation rounds to 30% when we're talking about the US, and US imports actually 10%, while China is the 30%. That said, it doesn't look, although the US has the 30% effective rate and China has still the lower one, the 10%, but still there is a lot of complementarity. They are the top largest trading partners. The US still have China as the top largest trading partner after Mexico and Canada, while even China has as the US being the largest trading partner. So there is a lot of complementarity in this, yet the rivalry is at most right now. So they reached in the negotiations for the rare earth, because the US depends a lot on the rare earth that use those magnetics and those minerals in their high-tech industries, relying on China, knowing that 70% of the rare earth is imported from China, and China controls 90% of the global rare earth. That said, that has an upper hand now, China. However, still, China also depends on the US because it's right now the third largest creditor. So it holds a lot of US Treasury securities of its debt, although it has reduced its role. It used to be the top largest creditor with 1.3 trillion in 2011. Right now, it became third with almost 750 billion. They're trying to reduce, diversify into gold. That's what China's doing. And that's why we're seeing the gold prices picking up as well, and not as a safe haven only during crisis, but also because of the demand from different central banks, as well as from China being, trying to diversify away from the US Treasury, away from the dollar, decoupling into many companies. That's interesting because we see that rivalry among top, trade partners, top two global economic powers. So the world is watching, the markets are watching, and this might have a lot of repercussions on different financial markets right now. So during that period, it's like the Cold War. It's a lot of the national security issues being pressured using, that not only trade tariffs, but also the AI and the, technology being that race affecting different aspects in their race right now.
So, Doctor, you mentioned there it is a big rivalry between the US and China, almost like the Cold War in many respects. But it's quite interesting that they've reached a framework. And even though they've done this, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, says China still hasn't brought the pace of rare earth magnet exports back up to the level that they were meant to be, the level we saw in April. So if that doesn't happen, what does it mean for the confirmation of the Geneva Agreement, which we saw both sides obviously sign?
I think what's going on right now, it's this arm wrestling, trying to get each one what they want from the other. The rare earth is very important for the US. 70% depends on China from that. China knows it controls 90% of the rare earth globally. So it's trying to use that card. Nonetheless, there is a lot of issues, for national security, for the economic race, especially in the supercomputing system. And when we are talking about AI supercomputing right now, we know that the US is building its target, $500 billion plus the 200 billion in Pentagon contracts for the AI defense. That actually creating a lot of intensity and the competitiveness in this role. It's, spreading all beyond the tariffs. So there is a kind of package, I think they're working on that. They're also looking at the decoupling. We know recently that actually 30% of US companies are being delocating from China to Vietnam and India. And that's double the rate since 2020.
And Doctor, that's
China.
Oh, sorry for interfering, but of course that's very interesting because China have been diversifying their portfolios really since Donald Trump's first term and the tariffs on China put in there. That's something we can't forget. China were effective at doing that. But where does this leave US and China economic relations now? We've seen a framework for the tariffs. As you say, we've seen arm wrestling between the two countries. We've actually seen the US dollar fall. There's been so much going on in the markets, ramification for companies. So now, where does this leave their relationship economically?
You can see, if we look historically a little bit over the past decade, we see a lot of decoupling. Usually, a lot of reliance used to be on the dollar, a lot of reliance on US treasuries and interest and demand from China on that. They've always been top trading partners over the past few years. However, over the past few years, we are seeing a lot of divergence in that. Exactly as you said, China is working on the Chiconomics, which is the self-reliance on their chip making, trying to even rival the mega chips, to rival NVIDIA, for instance, by scaling up the startup Byron, for instance, trying to counter-attack with the Stargate massive data centers they are building in Texas nowadays, the US with Oracle and with the SoftBank funding and everybody. There is a race in this. And I think there is a lot of divergence. And this has ramifications on the national security. It has on the cybersecurity. It's a Cold War, as I just mentioned earlier. Plus, there is a lot of fear on that. This is a really Cold War. So there is a Cold War in AI intelligence, in AI race. If we look at take for instance, it's very interesting to look at the race, how it's going. Like in the supercomputing GPUs that they are building, about 400,000 in the Stargate. Right now, they had the Sputnik effect, the wake-up call from the DeepSeek against the ChatGPT several months ago. It was cheaper and high-performing at the same time. While we look at out of the 13 leading tech sectors, right now, China is leading 5 of the 13, such as drones, EV, high-speed rails, drones, even the first eVTOL is going to right now be launched commercially in China. That said, if we look at the models as well, the new leading models are right now in technology. We have in the US 40 leading models versus in China 15. So you can see the proportion in this way. There is a race right now. There is a divergence. Although if there were complementarity and there was more like that, the technology and the race and the new innovations in technology would have been, skyrocketed at a faster
Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna, I'm so sorry, we're going to have to leave it there, but it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I would like a supercomputer soon. Might help me get my work done a little bit faster. CEO of the... Thank you so much. CEO of the Academy of Business Management Conferences and former consultant at the World Bank. Thank you once again. A reminder of our top stories. Hamas responded to a 60-day ceasefire deal but pushed for a complete end to the war. President Trump lifts sanctions on Syria to support the country's path to stability and peace. And Sean Diddy Combs is found not guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking, but guilty of transportation in prostitution. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.